Hey,
I was
oh,
busy. I was busy texting a friend that the chat today is about lead-based paint.
okay, good. Yeah, I just felt like there's a lot of uh, confusion and misinformation about it, and we're going to simplify it. We're going to keep it simple as to whose responsibility is what. So I'm going to go ahead and jump in, and this is being recorded. So I know a couple of people are now logging in, so that's excellent. Welcome, Josh. I'm going to go ahead and jump in. Let's see here. All right, so a couple new forms were created. The F318 and the F317 were both created in the 2025 forms package. And these are notices to make sure that agents and brokers can prove that they notified a seller of what their legal obligations are around lead-based paint. So the way it works is if any portion of the dwelling predates 1978. So it could be something like a reclaimed wood wall or a mantle or something like that that is added to a newer home, but the components predate 1978 and their fixtures and they're built in. Or if you had, say, a tear down where somebody used a very valuable piece of property and tore down an older home and rebuilt on top of it, if there's any portion of that old property, old home left that predates 1978, you're going to need a lead-based paint exhibit. So bottom line is, when in doubt, it hurts nothing to have a lead-based paint exhibit attached. That said, I am not of the thought process of including it in every contract as an extreme abundance of caution. There are brokerages out there and there are builders and other entities out there that include lead-based paint exhibits in every single solitary contract because they're so paranoid that somehow they won't be compliant. I am never going to advise that you do that. But you just do need to be mindful that if any portion of the property predates 1978, then when in doubt, or if you're not 100% sure about the date of the construction and there's any doubt, when in doubt, attach it and follow the procedures. So what we're looking at here on the screen is the new seller's brokers notice, and there's one for buyer's brokers as well. This is the seller's brokers notice of obligations regarding lead-based paint. This is non-negotiable for you to send to all sellers to prove that you notified them if your seller has a property that any portion of it predates 1978. So as the listing agent, that's the hat we're wearing right now in this conversation, is that of the listing agent. You're going to deliver this with your signature to a seller. Absolutely positively deliver it. And I'm really big on taking sent emails where you've delivered specific attachments and printing them as PDFs and saving those so you have that receipt that you delivered it. So emailing it to a client, emailing it to a client is going to be adequate to prove that you notified them. Now let's look at what it's notifying them of, because this is something that a lot of sellers representatives, sellers brokers aren't fully aware of. It says that they have to disclose, a seller has to disclose to the buyer the presence of known lead-based paint and or lead-based paint hazards. Well, under Beretta, which is Title 10-6, the Broker Relationship and Real Estate Transaction Act, if you ever have a seller that's not disclosing any kind of defect, this or any other defect, you would have to disclose it. And we do have a broker information disclosure form in the GAR forms, but you need to disclose it, you need to disclose it in writing. Number two, provide the buyer with all available records, if any exist. They're not required to have any records, but if any exist, then they need to provide them. Pertaining to lead-based paint hazards in the residential housing. Number three, provide buyer with lead-based paint hazard information pamphlet. That is the legal requirement of the seller. And if you are representing the seller, that means that's on you to make sure that that lead-based paint pamphlet is actually emailed to the buyer. Well, I realize that you're not representing the buyer and you don't have the buyer's direct email in most cases, but delivery to the buyer's agent is considered delivery to the buyer. And again, if you have a sent email showing that that attachment was sent, a part of that email, you can go in and print that sent email as a PDF and save it in your file as delivery of lead-based paint pamphlet. So, Amy, you had a question.
So is it the pamphlet that we have to provide the buyer or just the lead-based paint exhibit?
Oh, the pamphlet you have to provide the buyer as well.
Okay,
The
is
exhibit
this
has to be filled out by the seller first, like a disclosure statement, and provided to the buyer or buyer's agent. Then the buyer fills out their portion, and then it becomes an exhibit to the binding contract. And it must be done and become a part of the binding contract before it becomes a binding contract. That is a requirement of the EPA. And then you, as the representative for the seller, have to actually make sure, because your seller's the one who's legally obligated under the federal law to provide that pamphlet to the buyer. So if you're representing the seller, you've got access to that pamphlet, you need to send that to the buyer's agent. And this is not being done. And
I think I'm getting mixed up between the exhibit and the pamphlet.
I'm going to show them both to you in
Okay.
just a couple slides, I promise.
Okay.
We'll show you both. But number one, this document here, if you're representing a seller, goes to the seller out of the gate the minute you get the listing, period. Then you need to also give them the blank exhibit so they can fill out the 2 or 3 questions at the top, yes or no, I know, I don't know, et cetera, et cetera. Very, very brief. There's no wrong answer. They're going to fill out their portion of the exhibit. That's number 2, and be prepared to deliver that exhibit to a buyer as soon as you get an offer along with the pamphlet. So we're going to go over that. But then last, I wanted to point out here on paragraph 4, it says that the seller is acknowledging that they have to permit the buyer, if the buyer opts for it in the lead-based paint exhibit, a 10-day risk assessment inspection period that is completely separate from any of their other rights in the contract, 10 days from the binding agreement date, to determine if there's lead in the property, any lead paint, and have testing done. And if there is, they have the right to terminate. Now, if they had, say, for example, a 7-day due diligence or no due diligence, this 10-day period, if they opted for it, which there's a opt-in or opt-out section in the lead-based paint exhibit, then this is its own right. And this is going to be limited only to the results of lead-based paint testing, but nevertheless, it's its own 10-day right. Does all that make sense so far? Okay. I'm going to take that as a yes. So this is the new form. It's the F318. This is what you as a seller's representative immediately give to a seller as soon as you get a listing. And then the next step is the actual exhibit. This is both pages of the lead-based paint exhibit. Now, at the top, you'll see where you put the address that it's affiliated with. And then it says in bold, all caps, under federal law, this exhibit must be signed by seller and buyer provided with a copy of lead-based paint brochure prior to buyer and seller entering into binding agreement. This agreement must be filled out for all housing built prior to 1978 or any portion of the property that is built prior to 1978. You see here where I've highlighted seller's disclosure. That's the section A and B. That's it. That's all the seller has to fill out. And they are going to choose between item A1 or A2. And they're going to add any additional information or explanations if applicable. And they're just going to initial next to the appropriate blanks. And then that's it. So this needs to be prepared ahead of time. And as soon as you get an offer, and you'll notice here on the second page at the top, where I have it highlighted in green, that's where you're going to initial your initials, and then you sign it, and you're going to initial your initials that you sent that document, the F318 that we just looked at on the previous screen. You sent this notice to the seller. That's what you're initialing up here at the top on the second page of that exhibit. So, this gets, the top filled out by you, it gets initialed by you, signed by you, then the seller is going to fill out on the front page, sections A and sections B, and the seller obviously signs as well. And then, of course, broker information, etc. And then this is presented to any buyer or buyer's agent that is preparing to make an offer on the property. And then you must send them this, which is the CB04. It's a GAR form, CB for consumer brochure 04 lead-based paint pamphlet. Protect yourself, your family from lead in your home. And this must be sent along with a copy of that exhibit. This pamphlet is 20 pages long. It does not attach to the purchase and sale agreement as an exhibit, but in the exhibit itself, the buyer is actually acknowledging in the exhibit that they received it. So, so if you look at the first page of the exhibit on the left side of the screen, B, under buyer's acknowledgement, says buyer has received a copy of the pamphlet, protect your family from lead in the home. And the federal law, which is referenced in the back section of the on page 2 of this exhibit, this requires that the seller be the one who's obligated to deliver this pamphlet. I would say the vast majority of listing agents are probably not fully aware of that responsibility, and they are not delivering this pamphlet, and it's exposing them to a lot of liability for not following through, and it's exposing their sellers to a lot of liability for not following through on that. But again, we're going to switch gears when we're talking about representing the buyer and what your duties are where that's concerned. But for right now, as far as representing a seller, this is your absolute requirements that you have to do as the agent. Anybody got a question about this so far? All right, pamphlet, non-negotiable, got to be sent to the buyer or buyer's agent. Now, let's switch gears. This is the buyer representing a buyer. We now have a pamphlet, and it says that this is only required for a buyer's agent to deliver to a seller if the seller is paying the buyer's broker compensation. Well, you may not know in the beginning of a transaction when you're getting ready to make an offer whether that's actually going to happen or not. That could be a big question mark. Are we going to ask for it, number one? And in a lot of cases, we are going to ask for it, but that doesn't mean the seller's going to agree. So it's an unknown. Here's the bottom line. It hurts absolutely nothing for you to send this form. So this is the counterpart for buyer's agents of the required notice, and this is the F317, and it's called buyer's broker's notice to seller. So the way notice is defined in our purchase and sale agreement, if you deliver notice to the sellers, assuming you don't have the seller's email address, if you deliver notice to the seller's broker or the seller's agent, whose email you have, that is considered delivery of notice to the seller. Just like when the seller's broker delivers the lead-based paint exhibit and lead-based paint pamphlet to you as the buyer's agent, it's considered notice to the buyer, and you are required to forward those to the buyer. So it works the same in reverse. If you are representing a buyer and this property or a portion of the property predates 1978, I want you to send this form with your signature as the buyer's agent, and don't get down into the weeds as to whether the seller may or may not actually pay a portion of your commission. Just go ahead and send it. It absolutely hurts nothing for you to send it. And then the second page of the lead-based paint exhibit, I want you to go ahead when that gets presented to you by the listing agent, with the seller having filled out their part and your buyer fills out their part. I want you to add your initials to section G because you did send that form. If the seller gets the notice from both their agent and the buyer's agent, all the better. I want you, no problem, all the better. Good, you know, that they got doubly notified. I just want everybody to make sure they're covering their own responsibility and not wait around assuming somebody else did the job. That said, what while I know that the obligation is on a seller for a seller to deliver the CB04 lead-based paint pamphlet to buyers, that isn't happening. And just because you and I, and even the law says that they're supposed to send it, we can't guarantee that the listing agent and slash seller's agent is going to actually deliver that pamphlet. And when in doubt, I want you to see to it as the buyer's agent. You may want to point this out to the listing agent that they need to deliver it to you for the buyer so they can prove that they did so. But again, you know, we're going to have cases where you're dealing with agents that don't care about details. They aren't responsive. They don't seem to think the rules apply to them. That's going to happen sometimes. And so I want you to make sure that that CB04 protect your family from lead in the home is delivered to the buyer if you're representing the buyer. So just take the initiative to always send, as the buyer's rep, this doc, the notice to the seller, always initial the second page where it says that you sent that notice to the seller. And again, you're sending it to the seller's agent, and that is considered notice to them. And you can also copy in, when it comes to delivering important notices, you can copy in the main office brokerage email. And you do that just by simply clicking on their broker code in the MLS listing. So like if you're looking at FMLS, it's real easy. You just click on the main broker code, and it will give you the main office email address. And you can copy that in and send notices to that main office email address as well. So I see Carlin just joined us. Carlin, I'm going to do a real quick recap because this is a very short presentation, but it's so important. I'm going to do a real quick recap. It's just a few slides. This is representing a seller first, when any portion of the property is built prior to 1978. I want you to always send to your seller, without fail, the minute you get a listing, I want you to send them the F318. And that's this document we're looking at, seller's broker's notice to seller. You sign it as the listing agent, and you deliver this to the seller, and it lets the seller know what their obligations are to disclose any lead-based paint, known lead-based paint hazards, to provide available records and reports if they have any, to provide the lead-based paint pamphlet, that is a federal requirement, to the buyer, the EPA pamphlet, which we have as a GAR form, and to permit the buyer a 10-day inspection period to test for lead-based paint and terminate if they discover lead-based paint, unless the buyer chooses to opt out of that. This is non-negotiable. You must send this every time. I think we lost Carlin. Okay, so again, here's your lead-based paint exhibit. This has got to be filled out. You would put the address and the initial stuff in. As the seller's agent, you would sign second page, initial item F on the second page that you gave the seller their required notice. And then you have the seller fill out the seller's disclosure sections A and B, and make sure that they are accurately disclosing whatever they do or do not know, and providing any information if they do have it. And then you must provide this exhibit, both pages, to a buyer's representative as soon as you have somebody who wants to make an offer. And you could also upload them to the docs in the MLS as well. But I would actually, because delivery is, uploading and making them accessible is not considered delivery. I would really want to make sure that you are actually emailing the docs, especially the pamphlet, because you have to prove you delivered it. And this doc says that the seller delivered the pamphlet to the buyer. And when you deliver the pamphlet to the buyer's agent, then that's considered delivered to the buyer, and the buyer's acknowledging in this exhibit that they received it. This is the pamphlet. It's GAR CB04. And again, while you can put this as a doc accessible in the MLS, in the docs upload, it's not considered proof of delivery at the end of the day. And like I said, you know, yes, the federal law requires that a seller, or in this case, the seller's representative, deliver this for the seller to a buyer, to the buyer's agent, so that the buyer's agent can then forward it on to their buyer. But that's not always a guarantee that that's going to happen, no matter how beautifully written the laws may be and the requirements may be. That doesn't make somebody do the right thing. So I want to make sure that buyer's agents know, when in doubt, make sure your buyer gets this pamphlet. And again, this is when we are shifting gears and representing a buyer. I want you to use the buyer's notice to the seller, although it is only technically required if the seller is paying the buyer broker compensation. That is maybe an unknown at the time that you're getting ready to make an offer. That could be a part of your offer, but there's no guarantee that that's actually going to end up happening. When in doubt, send this regardless. Go ahead and send it, and it doesn't hurt anything. So this is the F317. Send this doc, and then when you receive the lead-based paint exhibit, go ahead and fill out your initials, along with having your buyer fill out their portion at the bottom of page 1, at the top of page 2, initial G, which is where you are acknowledging that you actually sent that notice to the seller as well, because they're paying a portion of the compensation. Doesn't hurt anything. And then again, make sure that the buyer gets the pamphlet. Josh or Amy, did you guys have any questions, comments, or feedback about what you're experiencing out there right now?
Everyone's doing it differently. I do have a question about the F316.
The exhibit.
The exhibit. I had clients who have always lived in old houses. She's an architect. And when they got to the part about, you know, I can't see it. Sorry, I'm on a phone.
That's okay.
But, you know,
Okay,
when you
I can find it.
when you get to the first part where it's like, is there lead paint in the home? They're like, of course there is. Or it's like, do you have any knowledge of lead paint? And she's like, it's a 1923 home. Of course there's lead paint. It's been painted over 15 times. But we always have people say no. And is the knowledge of lead-based paint, meaning, do you have a report stating that?
I think that the knowledge is actual knowledge, not speculative knowledge. I think the knowledge is actual knowledge.
Okay. All right. Because we always
otherwise it's speculative knowledge that we assume that it was painted with, just because lead was commonly in paint, that we assume that would be there, but that's an assumption. So
okay,
my understanding of the way that question is supposed to be is it's actual knowledge that you maybe had some testing done. Maybe when you purchased the property, that you discovered the existence of lead-based paint. You did some testing, somebody disclosed it to you, that sort of thing.
Okay. All right. It's just new systems to put in place.
Yes, and hopefully what I'm trying to do here is keep it simple. I would rather you guys throw more stuff at, very simply deliver these few things and get them delivered ahead of time, and just be proactive, and just make it a thing. And start with the notice, and then follow up with this right away. Get your seller to fill it out. Let the seller know there's no wrong answer. They just have to initial what they do and do not know. And then get this to the agent and make sure that the agent has the buyer fill it out properly and attach it and reference it. It must be referenced in the exhibit section of their offer as being attached to the contract, or it's not legally considered attached. So it says, like I said, in bold at the top of this exhibit, that it has to occur. This has to be a part of the agreement when it goes binding. And when I took a class recently with Seth Weissman, he said it's so important that if this were added later to a contract, that it wouldn't meet the federal requirement, that he would actually advise that the parties completely and totally terminate that contract and rewrite a brand new contract and new earnest money, new everything, new dates, new everything with the lead-based paint exhibit attached. It's that important that it be attached at the time it goes binding.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Any more questions? Josh, did you have any questions?
Just to clarify what you just said, this form needs to be done before the buyer-seller contract is signed?
Correct. So the seller does their part first, and that can happen pretty soon after you list the property. The seller's portion is kind of like a disclosure statement. So just like you have a seller fill out a seller's disclosure statement, you would have them fill out this form as well with just sections A and B under the seller's disclosure sections and put the initials in the appropriate boxes. And then that's it. That's all. And then as soon as you get an offer, you're going to give this seller initialed, filled out, and signed, of course, document to the buyer's agent and along with the pamphlet that the seller is required to provide.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you.
But when in doubt, if you're representing a buyer, I still want you to do these procedures, which is send this buyer's notification to the listing agent, so it's there for the seller, and don't wait around to see if somebody's going to deliver the pamphlet to your buyer. You make sure your buyer gets that pamphlet.
Awesome. Thank you.
So I think the biggest thing is this that's causing people to get confused is these initial boxes, which which there's no law or rule that says that both brokers can't initial F and G on the second page. And all they are acknowledging is that the seller's broker sent this notice, which is signed by the broker or the agent, I should say, that all this is an acknowledgement that I sent this notice. And you as the agent sign it and you send it to your seller. And if you're representing a buyer, you as the buyer agent sign it and send it to the seller's agent, and then they send it to the seller. And all of these little boxes up here, F and G, are simply acknowledging that that notice was emailed. That's it. It doesn't need to get any more complicated than that. But the real biggie from the EPA's perspective is not only the act of sending those notices, but the fact that the seller has to fill out their portion first, and that buyer then is given a copy of this exhibit so they can fill out their portion second, and then this completed exhibit becomes an attachment to the purchase and sale at the time it becomes binding, and the pamphlet is delivered to the buyer prior to it officially becoming binding. And that is really supposed to come from the seller side. Any questions? Okay, guys, I am going to wrap it up. Well, I see we have a new attendee that just jumped in. Did you have any questions about what we're going through here?
No,
Yay.
I do not. I do not have any questions. Hi, how you doing?
Okay. Okay, great. All right. So we were just talking about the importance of the lead-based paint exhibit being filled out by the seller first and delivered along with a copy of the lead-based paint pamphlet to the buyer before it goes under contract. And the use of the two new forms, the notice that seller's broker sends to their seller immediately as soon as they get the property listed, notifying them of their duties, and then the one that the buyer's agent sends to the seller, notifying them of their duties. And the importance of, as a buyer's agent, that you make sure that your buyer gets that lead-based paint pamphlet, even though technically and legally it is required to be provided by the seller or the seller's agent for delivery to the buyer. We know in all practical terms that as much as that is required, it's not happening. And a lot of listing agents do not know that and do not understand that, even though it's basically says it in bold at the top of the exhibit, that is right here in bold, that this exhibit has to be completed, filled out, and fully signed and attached before the contract becomes binding, and that it's acknowledging that the buyer was given this pamphlet here, the CB04, by the seller prior to going under contract. The buyer's acknowledging that. And I feel like behaviorally, a lot of agents are skipping that step. They're focused so much on the exhibit that they're forgetting that the pamphlet is absolutely critical. And one of the main reasons that this exhibit even exists is for the acknowledgement that the buyer was given that pamphlet. That's one of the main functions of this exhibit, is that the buyer is acknowledging that they got that pamphlet. And that's down there under buyer's acknowledgement in section D, on the front page of this exhibit, where the buyer has received the pamphlet. And it says seller is the one who is supposed to give it to them. Okay, guys, well, I am going to wrap up. If anyone wants to join me, I'm going through a sample purchase and sale, F201 purchase and sale with my fake seller, Sally Seller, and my fake buyer, Joe Buyer. And we're going through basically the entire F201 form. And that starts at 1 o'clock. If you guys want to log back in, you're going to need to log out of this, because we're going to end this presentation, but log back in at 1 o'clock and join me if you want to for Contracts 101.
Angie?
Yes.
One quick question, back to lead-based paint. Are the F317 and F318 both required, or just one of them?
It depends. It's only required of you to send, it's required of you to send for whichever side you're on. If you're representing the seller, you absolutely must send the F317. If you're representing the buyer, I want you to send the F318. So it's something that I just want you to be in the habit of doing. The F318, which is the one that's the buyer is to deliver, this one here, it's actually the 317. The buyer one, I want you to get in the habit of delivering it before you make an offer on a property that that has lead-based paint. It technically says you're only obligated to deliver this if a seller's paying any portion of the buyer broker compensation, but that is actually fairly common and often being negotiated. And so when in doubt, send this form. It hurts nothing.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Again, these are just unilateral notices. It hurts nothing. It hurts nothing to send it. And you don't have the seller's email, so you're sending it to their agent. And then you're going to back it up by acknowledging here in paragraph G on the second page that you did so, that you sent it. If they paid buyer broker compensation, fine. If they didn't pay buyer broker compensation, fine. It doesn't matter. You're covered either way. These are just simple little habits that you can go ahead and implement and not get into the weeds of the particulars of that situation.
All right, thanks so much.
Okay, thanks, guys. I'm going to go ahead and sign off, and then I will be back on camera here in less than 30 minutes, in about 26 minutes, and we will be going over going over the purchase and sale agreement in detail. Hopefully I'll see a couple of you guys then. Thanks so much.